So we packed our bags and we hopped on the train to France to bring you another outside broadcast. Welcome to Retromobile. This is the Historic Racing News Radio Show. This huge show features everything from people selling multi-million pound historic cars to the odd stand selling red wine, oysters, all those sorts of things as well. But I went to catch up with a few people who have exhibition stands here. Will Anson is going to talk to me about the cars he has on his stand, and I know our friends from Historic Sports Car Racing, HSR, are here, and I'm going to catch up with them. Art and Revs, I've just noticed, have a Jaguar XJR 14 for sale on their stand, so I'm going to go and talk to them, and I can't ignore that one. Oh, and there's an Alfa Romeo boat. I want to have a look at that one too.
À 3 millions d'euros. 3 millions 100 000. 3.1. 2 millions 5. 3 millions 700 000. À 3 millions 8. On accuse.
I'm now on the stand here at Retromobile of William I. Anson Limited, and there are some glorious cars around about, which we'll come to in a minute. But well, what is it about this exhibition that's different from all the others?
I think it's the sort of international element and the tradition. You know, we've all come here for years, and it's the one show everybody wants to come to, and they all come expecting to see something different and special, and you always do see something different. You know, we've been coming for years, you've been coming for years. There's always something, you know, well, lots of things, but there's always that little something you see, you go, I've never seen that before. Yeah. And I think it's one of the only places you come to where you really see that.
And as you say, it's very international, isn't it? That looking around the hall here, that we're up at the posh end, and that, you know, you've got these cars which we'll talk about, but you don't have to walk very far to the other end of the exhibition hall, and you've got those big trestle tables full of old spotlights and things.
I think that's part of what it's all been about. You know, I think it's the mixture of the two. You know, and it's the chance to come and look at all the cars, but everybody wants to go and rummage through the books, and everybody wants to find that set of Marshall headlights that they couldn't find, and you know, sort of like dreaming in the old days of walking through a brocante store in France and finding a front axle or something, which doesn't happen anymore, sadly. But you know, it's. I think that's part of it. Yeah.
It's the thing, isn't it? When these days you walk around through that brocante stall and you say, this is the front axle from a 1934 Peugeot, how much do you want? And expect them to say 55 euros, and they say 7,000 euros.
Yeah, it's a bit disappointing. Yeah, those days have kind of changed, haven't they?
Yeah. But it's so much variety. And just talk us through the cars that you've got on the stand here.
Yeah, sure. We tried to sort of, actually it's been nice, we tried to get a car from all the different eras that we're sort of involved with and like. So, I mean, obviously from my point of view, we've got to have a Bugatti, and actually we've been really lucky because this is such a significant car. And it's been a pleasure working with this car, the more you delve into it. I mean, that car is one of the best early Grand Prix, most complete early Grand Prix Bugattis. So
it's a 35, is it?
It is 35, so it was supplied new to Paris in 1926. We know everything about its life bar the first 2 years. So we just don't know that. We know its second registration, we don't know its first registration. I've seen pictures of it in Paris on its alloy beaded edge wheels. It raced Spa in 1929 in 10 hours where it won its class. Then it was sold to Prince Bertil of Sweden in 1934 and driven back to Sweden. I think he raced it in France, although we don't have a record of that, but apparently he did. Then it went back to Sweden with him. We got photos of him arriving in Sweden, and he's on the original registration documents. Then it's just got, it was raced on the ice in the 40s. It was supercharged at that point. It's just remained complete, and you know, throughout. In the 40s, they changed a couple of things on the engine that are still on the engine, all there. So to have a chance of a car with, you know, majority of the body is original to the car, the chassis is original to the car, the gearbox, the engine, the back axle, the torque arm, the springs. It's something you just can't find anymore. A car that complete.
And I think the car is perhaps unusual for a Bugatti because they tend to be at one or other end of the spectrum. That you see a lot of Bugattis that are, in inverted commas, original, tatty, for want of a better expression. This isn't a Concours Queen, but
it's not. He races it.
He races it. But it is very, very tidy. It looks fabulous.
And the nice thing, he races it. Actually, it's got a new engine in it, and the original engine. They went to look at the original engine, thinking, well, do we restore this to race it? And the decision was made. It's running. It was so wonderful. Actually, to really push it, you'd change stuff. So why change the original? So he put a brand new supercharged engine in the car. The original is beautiful, all numbered, and it's in a beautiful box, which actually which we've got. And he runs and uses the car.
And that's exactly the way that it should be. And sitting next to it is
tough one. I love that car.
Yeah. That Lister Jaguar Costin is perhaps my earliest memories of motorsport would be in the sort of late 50s. And as you say, tough one. TUF1 was the registration originally.
Yeah, and it's only in its first year, funnily enough. So in 59, when it was sold to Mike Anthony, it ran Tough One. It ran the Whitsun Trophy at Goodwood. It has the distinction, this car, of being one of very few listers to be able to run as a Chevy that ran as a Chevy and a Jaguar in its period. So in 59, Mike Pendleton bought the car as a rolling chassis, supplied his own engine, which he had special manifolds made to run downdraft Solexes like the D50 Lanciers. And he raced it. He took it to Roscold Ring. We've got lovely photos on file. And then he sold it in 60 to Mike Pendleton, and he put a Jaguar engine in it, and then raced it extensively. And it's so throughout its life, it's been raced with both. Jerry Marshall owned it in the 70s famously and won the Lloyd's and Scottish Championship in it. Julian Bronson owned it for years and won the Sussex Trophy. It's just consistently been raced throughout its life and used on the road, but it's remained really probably arguably one of, if not the most original Lister Costins left in existence.
Which is quite something because there are relatively quite a few of them around, and that's...
Well, not so many Costins.
No, true.
Yeah,
true.
I think they only made 13.
Yeah, but it's, again, immaculate, looks fabulous, and I love the idea of running that on the road. I just think that would
There's a lovely story of one of the previous owners driving on Christmas Eve in the snow from his house in the King's Road to his family house in Sussex with the turkey in the passenger seat and the presents. So, yeah.
All he needed was the Santa hat.
Yeah, I think I would have blown off probably, but yeah.
And then looking further around the...
Yes, we get up into the 60s, and for me, I love Cobras. We've dealt with a lot of Cobras, but to see a Cobra in its proper street trim, I mean, race Cobras are fantastic to drive, but if you get a chance to drive a proper Cobra on the road, as it was meant to come out of the factory, they're magic. And that car is a really lovely original car, all matching, all original body. It was sold. It spent a lot of its life in Carmel in California. It was sold in '66 to a gentleman when he was 18. And he drove it to college, autocrossed it in period. And he sold it. It ended up selling to a senator's son who started to drive home and back to the senator of the son of Rhode Island. Son of the senator of Rhode Island bought it, set off with his girlfriend to drive back to Rhode Island in the winter. Got as far as Arizona and obviously thought this is too wet and left it there with the dealer. It was bought by a friend of the previous owner, and then he ended up. He was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. It's just lovely long stories, and it's totally original. You look inside the engine bay; it's completely original. Look under it's magic. It's sort of
because
what we want to see.
So many Cobras have been messed about with.
Yeah, and this one hasn't. It's in its original colour, and it's just it's nice to see it pure on the skinny arches. That's how we like it.
As it should be, perhaps.
Yeah.
And finally.
From one
right
extreme to the other. Yeah. So that's, I mean, we do a lot with modern race cars as well, and it's clear to see a lot of racing. Although the early stuff is still very popular, there's a growing climb towards an access to racing more modern stuff. And fantastic racing for it with Peter Auto, with Masters. So this is a front-running Peter Auto car. So it's a Riley and Scott Mark 3C. It's the first of only 4 running. Runs a Ford V8 in the back, fast, strong, aero, really usable car. And you can go and do all of Peter Autos with that. That they were beating the Audis or matching the Audis in period, and you can still do that today for a fraction of the cost.
And it's interesting. We talked on the show before about the fact that as time goes by, the people perhaps my age who look back on that lister there and say, yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
But people now who are much younger would look back on a Riley and Scott with fondness in their eyes and looking back on their youth.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we're also seeing people who would have now maybe, made some money, sold their businesses, maybe would have gone and raced modern cars. The contemporary would have gone, I'll have a crack at British GT or something. The pedigree of historic racing has got so high now that actually it's become you can go and race in British GT, or you can go and race a front-running ALMS LMP1 car. It's more exciting, and it's good racing and good venues. So we're seeing people making that decision, and people are keen and to race them. And
we have this discussion quite often on the show of whether historic racing has now become too professional, and that kind of fits in with your comments there. Whether it's too professional or not, I don't know.
I think there's room for everything, and I think that what is professional. If you're like a lot of the gentleman drivers in period, what's a professional? If you're a keen racer and you want to get fit and you want to run at the front and you want to do that. Is that too professional? No, that's great. You can run this, and I think there's enough room for everything. There's enough room across the grids. If you don't feel you want to have to push at the front, there's great racing throughout. Take a pre-66 grid. If you want to be at the front, you're in a Cobra and a Jaguar, and you're battling it out. In the middle, there's fantastic racing as well, and MGs and all sorts of other cars that everyone's having equally as much fun. It's good.
Well, I can see a queue of people wanting to talk to you, Will. So I'm not going to keep you any longer. But for now, thank you very much indeed.
Absolute pleasure.
And we'll get together again soon.
Sounds good. Good to see you as always.
Joe Bradley has many interests, some of which we can't talk about on the show. But he is a bonkers slot car racing fan. Earlier this week, Joe caught up with a Facebook friend of his who is product manager at Scalextric, Simon Owen, to talk about their new 2023 range.
Simon, welcome to Historic Racing News.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
And mate, a massive round of applause. In fact, I'm standing up when I'm doing this. The 2023 range, I've got to say, is quite mind-blowing. You usually blow my mind, 2 or 3 times when you launch the coming year's range. But I've got to say, the 2023 list, I think we've already spent $2,500 on pre-orders, by the way. And it prompts me to ask the question, so who is it at Scalextric that has their finger on the historic motor racing pulse?
So, as anybody would expect, it is a team effort. There's a few of us in the team. All of us enjoy cars or motorsport to some degree. But the historic stuff really, although it sounds a touch arrogant on this call after being told I could arrange the historic stuff really comes down to myself. I love historic racing. I love classic motorsport. And that's everything from the big events, Goodwood Members Meeting, Goodwood Revival, to the Masters, HSCC, and right down to Classic Sports Car Club and the Creep GTS, because I think that classic motorsport has such a varied range of styles, of cars. The access is so wonderful. The sights and smells of it almost are so much more exciting than a lot of modern motorsport. So it's definitely classics that have my attention. And the thing is, that resonates with our consumers. It's all very well me filling a range with my favourite sort of cars, but they have to sell. And we find that classic Fords, especially classic Formula One, All of this sort of stuff is really, really popular with our consumers. So it just makes sense for us to do them. And, at the end of the day, that Scalextric exists to make money for our parent company, Hornby Hobbies. And that's what we hope this range will do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the bit as a kind of a pure motorsport fan, you kind of forget it's all right, satisfying Mr. Bradley's needs with a Brabham Fan Car, but if nobody else is interested in that particular series or particular car, then you're not going to sell. But I think what resonates from your 2023 launch is the kind of very, very strong feel that you have for historic motorsport, and if we can start on the double pack, the twin pack, which I've already got on pre-order, the Brabham Fan Car, such a controversial car, but I see what that has enabled you also to do is also use that shell of the BT46 without the fan on the back, and there is in the offing the Italian Grand Prix John Watson version. So is that something with regards to needing to sell these things that you kind of, you're gonna be able to spread that model out and sort of, glean as much sales from it? I noticed the McLaren M23, for instance, you've brought out the Nelson Piquet M23 that he debuted, his very first Formula One race was in that M23 McLaren in Hockenheim, I think. So is that something at the back of your mind when you think making this thought process?
Absolutely. So the way we have to work as a business is that we have to get a certain return on any investment that we make. This return is normally guaranteed by doing a number of different liveries, a number of different variations on the same piece of tooling. Sometimes a model can be successful enough that we don't need to worry about this. So we did a 1966 Batmobile, the proper Adam West Batmobile. Yeah. And that particular model, we sold enough units that we don't need to worry about doing other versions because that is such a famous, iconic machine. With racing cars, it's rare that you find one quite so popular, even the fan car. So we need to be able to get some longevity out of that tool. The actual history behind this twin pack is it came about because of the Lotus. So we're looking to try and do as many Formula One World Championship winning cars as we can in special World Championship winning packaging, which is how we're presenting the PK Williams this year, the FW11, and also the Colin McRae Subaru, because it's not just F1 that we're doing in this packaging. So at some point, we'll do a Lotus 79 in this packaging, and I like to be able to put a contemporary Formula One car with a release. So we've done the Ayrton Senna Lotuses, the 97, 98, 99T, that's paired with the Williams FW11. And this year, we've decided we'll do the Lotus 79, and flicking through the books and information, we decided upon the Brabham as the perfect stablemate to it, not necessarily because it was the most competitive in its standard version, but because it gave us an excuse to do the fan car, and we knew it would get attention because it's got a whacking great bin lid attached to the back of it.
I love that little attention to detail, though. I mean, the fact that you've got the fan to spin with on the rotation of the motor, phenomenal. But to then add on the little bin lid that the team used to cover the mechanism that they were using on the back of that is just a brilliant attention to detail. Yeah,
something that we try and do is, a lot of the team actually aren't into motorsport in the same way I am. A lot of them actually into esports and they play a lot of video games. And a lot of video games, you have little Easter eggs hidden in the games, little attention to details, things you miss at the first glance. So what we're trying to do with our range is add those little Easter eggs in. A lot of people, when they open that box set, will be like, why is there... They'll just think it's a cover for the fan. They won't really get what it is. But maybe they will Google that. People like yourself know about it. There's other little touches we've got on some limited edition cars coming up we haven't announced yet, which is little nods to some of the sponsors and little things like that just show that we're not a faceless organisation just churning out models because we think people will buy them. We love this product too. Lotus 79 and the BT46 aren't my favourite Formula One cars, but I like them. The liveries are really nice, but things like the Colin McRae Subaru, the Colour Science Escort we're doing, those are properly from my childhood. That is rallying to me. That is what standing in the forest in a bobble hat is all about. So little extra attention to details on those because they're products that if I didn't work here, I'd still want to purchase. And the perfect catalogue to me is something that I flick through and I think, wow, this would be quite expensive for me as well as other people.
And you know what? Some of your models and the details that you now find on the Scalextric range, some of them you feel like you shouldn't really put them out on a track. They are so detailed and so perfect. And there's a one for you, right? So I've just taken possession of the PK Williams FW11 after already purchasing the Mansell one, and I wasn't aware that it was coming with a commemorative box. And so I thought, oh, that is fabulous. And just for listeners who don't realize this, so, the Scalextric branding and the boxing is usually the light blue with the yellow Scalextric. But the PK car came in this beautiful British green racing, and in gold has got the commemorative 1987 Formula One world champion. And so for me, Simon, you're going to cost us another 50 quid, mate, because I've already pre-ordered the twin pack, so I've already got the Andretti Lotus 79, but I'm going to have to buy it in the commemorative box now, aren't I?
That is unashamedly the business head on there saying, right, we've got all these Formula One cars. How can we get people to buy ones they've already got? And yeah, that is what it is. It's having this nice little collection, and other diecast, especially brands, have done it. And it's just a way of repackaging stuff in a nice box, and it. But it won't just be Formula One. We will look at WRC. Maybe we'll chuck a Rivalia BMW in there. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. People that have been crowned world champions. So, it gives us an opportunity to do famous liveries either again, because people missed them on the first time, or just have them in a really nice box, because so many of our consumers don't race these cars. They don't ever touch a track. They sit on a shelf. So let's make it as attractive as we can for the shelf then.
Yeah, we call them shelf queens. We've got quite a few in our collection. Another bit of attention to detail is expanding the six-wheel Tyrrell, the Tyrrell P34 range that you've already done. So you bring out. I think I bought that commemorative collection of the Tapaye Schecter car, but you've extended that one, and there's not many people going to know this, but the car debuted at the Spanish Grand Prix in '76, and the only difference at that Grand Prix where it debuted, and there was only Depailler who debuted it because Schecter didn't like the car, so he gave the job to Depailler, was the airbox. Yeah. And you know what? Another round of applause from me, because that's a car, even though I've got, I think, 4 versions of the Tyrrell P34 now, I'm going to have to buy that Spanish car, because that is the only race that airbox ever appeared. But again, being an aficionado, I've got to buy that.
Well, it's even more obscure than that. I actually only practiced with it on.
Oh, really? Did it? Right. Fabulous. Yeah,
they took it. I think they took it off for the race. There's only a few pictures with it on. We toured that just because we like the look of it, and it just gave that model's quite a tricky car, very, very famous. Everyone loved it, but it's really limited on liveries. You do get the 1977 liveries as well when they went back to the earlier car when the second generation was support, but it's it's quite limited for us. So it's just ways of doing little different bits on it, little different here and there, just to entice people to buy it again. And interesting actually, that model, because we the one that we looked at to get the information was the one belonging to Mr. Schecter. Right. So we went down to his private collection at the back of his house. I mean, I'm saying house. I mean, palace, I think, is more.
I think he lives on a ranch, doesn't he? Does he still breed buffalo or something?
If he does, there's up in the UK. There was no buffalo on this site. Those gardens. He was telling us when we went down to see it. Nice chap, really accommodating. That he hated driving it, and the little windows in the side of the cockpit, he asked for them to be put in because he didn't like the fact he couldn't see the front wheels otherwise. And he was worried about having a puncture halfway around an apex of a corner. Yeah. So the reason it's got the little windows cut in is because Jody said Mr. Schecter said he wouldn't drive it otherwise. Yeah, I thought was quite an interesting. Why the early press cars don't have them, and then the later ones do, which I thought was quite interesting. But it's nice when you do this role, because you get to go look at stuff like that. He had, as I said, an amazing collection of Formula One cars, and you get to meet people like him, which is always quite entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought me nicely on to what was going to be my next question of what goes into and how much cooperation and collaboration do you have to have with the likes of Lotus? I know they've got the classic Lotus company. What exactly goes into you making a 132 scale model of their, the car that I competed with in the World Championship?
So with classic stuff, so with any Scalextric model of any car that exists in real life, we do occasionally make up our own designs, but for ones that exist in real life, you have to start with speaking to the licensor. So this would be classic Team Lotus for the Lotus 79. Lotus Group, as they are now, don't have the rights to the classic Formula One cars. That sits with Colin Chapman's son, Clive Chapman, who operates the classic racing team, and they look after all the old cars. And then in the case of the Brabham, it sits with Brabham as a licensor, which still sits with David Brabham, actually. But we don't deal directly with him. We do deal directly with Clive. So a lot of licensors, some of the bigger car companies, things like that, they don't actually have a huge knowledge of their history. So you want to do a car, if it's quite obscure, you have to let them know what it is. With Lotus, Classic Team Lotus rather, it's the other way around. Clive was there when these cars were being raced. He remembers going to the races with his father, so he feels emotionally attached to these models more than just it being a business transaction. Mm-hmm. So with him, every last nut, bolt, and detail has to be correct. For the 79, we're able to go and view the real car at a collection. We sometimes use 3D scanning. I think we did on the 79. We then use original drawings, also provided by Classic Team Lotus, and we use expensive models. If someone else has done a really, really good model, and Clive says to me, "Yeah, that model is absolutely perfect because I worked on it," then I trust that model to be perfect. He knows his stuff, So we will then use that, and then it all has to be approved. So we send off free views from the CAD or Scalextric cars designed in 3D CAD. Send that across to Clive or any other licensor. They approve the shape. Then we send across the livery. They approve the livery. Then we show them a picture of the production sample. They approve that. The final sample, they approve that. And then we can go on production. So there's quite a lot to it. With the 79, there weren't a huge amount of variance on it. It was pretty simple. If you do something like a Lotus 49 or the 25, 72, or when we did the 97, 98, and 99T, they're massively complicated toolings. Huge amount of investment goes into that. 3 different bodies for the later turbo cars. So then there's a lot of investment. We have to do a lot of work trying to make sure we get stuff right. And we'll still miss stuff because nothing designed by a human is ever perfect and nothing copied by a human can ever be perfect. So it's always little bits, but we try and do a good job and, hopefully people like them.
Well, I think we do like them a lot. What about things like, I'm just looking at the range now and I notice the Mark II Jaguar police car. Is that something that you would look at from pictures and you've already got the Mark II Jaguar as a race car version somewhere? I'm just looking at your website now. But that the Mark II Jag, is that more of a livery thing and going off pictures and then just sort of letting your guys do the modelling?
Yeah. So with the Jag, that's a brand new model for this year as well. We 3D scanned in person. Grant Williams owns obviously a famous Mark I Jaguar. He's also got a Mark II. Mm-hmm. So we scanned both on what can only be described as the most Welsh day in history. It absolutely chucked it down all day. And it was freezing cold. Luckily, Grant's personality and warmth kept us warm on that day. I think he got us through because he's such an amazing chap to speak to and spend time with. But so obviously we're doing the racing Mark I, then the Mark II police car, and it is a completely different body mold for those that know their Mark I and Mark II Jags. At first glance, they look similar. They're not similar. There's loads of differences. So it's a common chassis. Chassis remains the same. 2 different bodies, 2 different window units, and all different details. But yeah, we'll just base it on photos. We'll find a Mark II police car we've got some information on. We tried to base it on a famous car if we can, but this case it's just one that we like. And then we'll just base it off images. Yeah, go from photos. A lot of our range is done from photos. Some of these old Spa 24-hour cars, they don't exist anymore. It's difficult when photos were only in black and white to work out what colour they were, but yeah, luckily we've got colour images for most stuff. So yeah, we just base it off that. And police cars are really popular, so we expect that to probably outperform the racing car actually.
yeah, catch the bad guys. It's kind of just looking at the range, Simon. The excite. I'm just going to do a bit of a sales pitch for you. The Jim Clark collection, which is the triple pack, which is available on pre-order. It's got the Lotus 49, the Lotus, I think it's the 51, and the Mark I Cortina. That one's got to have the expanding the range on the Lotus 79. It's in the Martini colours that it ran in 1979. All right, I'm a racing guy. You're a racing guy. But there was an interesting fact that you told me when we chatted, when we set this interview up, that your TV and movie range outsells the racing range.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the racing range, we have some really good sellers, but some of that, the TV and film stuff, the Bond stuff, especially, and things like the Batmobile and the DeLorean, you're looking at 2-3 to 1 outselling the racing stuff easily. Fab 1 is our most successful car in pre-order this year, the great big Lady Penelope Rolls Royce. Yeah, the thing is, TV and film collectors, people often collect TV and film pop culture stuff. And a lot of our TV and film pop culture stuff is all of a similar age group. It's, for Thunderbirds and for the Adam West Batmobile, it's people's childhood. And then for the Back to the Future Knight Rider bits and pieces that we do, that is their adolescence, sort of teenage, early 20s years. And then we do Bond, which is all ages. So it's a similar demographic the whole way through.
Yeah.
And there are odd bits here and there people can collect. And then it's a much wider demographic as well. If you think of how many people would tune in and watch Sky Sports F1 on a Sunday afternoon, it's a pretty big number. But think how many people in their lifetime have seen Back to the Future.
Yes.
So it's actually a much bigger market. And the whole thing that I want to do with the brand is it'd be very easy for me to sit here and just create a catalogue just of my favourite racing cars and say to the business, this is what it will deliver, this is the investment I need, and we'll just plod along in the background, thank you very much. But as I prefer old cars to new cars and, this sort of stuff, it wouldn't grow the brand and it wouldn't get new people into Scalextric. Mm-hmm. Scalextric is a great, fun toy and a hobby. So we need to get it to as many new people as possible. And the entertainment license stuff will do that. And we saw that in the last quarter of last year with the Back to the Future versus Knight Rider set, that it gets slot racing to people who aren't into motorsport. Maybe they're not into cars. It's just about getting our brand and our product out there to a wider group of people to, make some money for the business, but also to grow this great hobby, which is slot racing. And it's a great hobby if you collect them, if you race them, if you play with them, whatever you do, if it brings you joy, then it's a great thing to do.
It absolutely is, Simon. It's never been a toy in my view. Even when I was 9 years old, it's always been a sport for me. I really appreciate you coming and talking to us, Simon, but I'm going to be a little bit self-indulgent here. What's the likelihood, and can we please think about different track pieces? I'll tell you why. We've had the same track pieces since I was about 9 years old. And is there any kind of scope for changing, sort of, like, for instance, the Goodwood chicane? That would be a massive, massive redevelopment. The Goodwood chicane. Can you remember that one from way back?
Yeah. Now, the trouble with track pieces is they actually require a lot of investment compared to a car.
Right.
And it's difficult for me to look at my bottom line and say, well, we can try developing this track piece. How will it go compared to a car where I can say it will deliver this amount of money back? It's also, they're big tool machines to develop new track pieces. And so it's a bit tricky. And to be honest with you, the reason the Goodwood chicane, by the way, is quite sought after now is because they didn't sell many in period. People didn't have space for them. We are developing a lot of new track pieces for our micro system, which is the proper toy element of the range, because that's new consumers, that's kids, and a cheap extra add-on for adults to buy their kids for the micro system. But for 32nd at the moment, there's no plans to develop any new track pieces, but we've got to see what the future brings. I'm sure we will do some bits and pieces, because I used to have the skid chicane and other bits and pieces like that. So what I would say, of course, is that we do offer a converter piece. So the old track pieces, you can pop a converter piece either end and you can run them with the new stuff. Yeah, we've done that. So there is that option to anybody listening who said, well, I've got some old track, but it isn't compatible. Well, it is. All of Scalextric is backward compatible. If you've got a car from the 50s or early 60s even, just give it a clean, give it a scrub, and it will work on the most recent set you can buy from Amazon or our website. So it's, and the converter pieces link up to the classic track as well. Yeah, absolutely. We're already all over that, and I've been for a while. Simon, I can't thank you enough. It's been really interesting. I could literally talk to you for hours and on each individual pre-order, including the Thunderbirds FAB1. Even though I'm not a fan of TV and movies in my racing collection, I think I might still have to buy that one because that harks back to my childhood memories. Simon Owen, thank you so much, and mate, all I can say is a standing ovation and keep up the good work. It's been fabulous talking to you. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
The Historic Racing News Radio Show.
Right, we've made our way here at Retromobile over to perhaps the noisy part of the area. There's a nice presentation going on next door at the Fédération Française du Sport Automobile, the equivalent of the Motorsport UK, and they're doing some bits there. But I'm here with David Hinton from Historic Sports Car Racing, and David, you've got a very, very busy year ahead.
Yes, yep, it certainly is. It's busier than I expected, but that's good. It's some new challenges. We're going to be doing a couple of support races for NASCAR. One at Darlington, what they call the Throwback Weekend, which is where a lot of the modern NASCARs put on historic paint schemes like, Richard Petty's STP or maybe Dale Sr.'s Goodwrench colors. So a lot of the cars go back to those old paint schemes, and they've asked HSR if we would bring in 20 historic NASCARs and display them in the paddock and then do some exhibition laps behind the pace car. So
I had no idea that historic NASCAR was a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same all around the world. These professional race series, when the cars get retired, people want to continue to drive them. So we have a very strong, we call it our Group 8, which is historic stock cars, and we get cars from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And the last 3 years, it's really taken off. We're getting, at our big events, we're getting 30 cars showing up now.
That's tremendous, and I've learned something today, because I certainly didn't realize that NASCAR was a thing. Now, HSR is clearly busy as ever. I've been proud and privileged to work with you at Sebring and at Daytona, but you've got some new stuff in the mix as well.
Yeah, so for the last 2 years we've done the Rolex Monterey Motorsport Reunion. We've been the sanctioning body for that event, which we'll do again this year. And we're also going to be sanctioning, along with IMSA, the Rennsport Reunion at the end of September, all Porsche event. So we've added those two. And then back to NASCAR, we're also going to do a support race for NASCAR at Watkins Glen, where we'll actually put on a proper race for the historic Cup cars. So yeah, lots of new stuff for HSR this year.
Now, I've known you a long time, and you've been talking about trying to get into Watkins Glen forever. So you've finally achieved it.
Yes, as soon as the purchase happened with IMSA, they asked me, what do I need? I said, I really want to go to Watkins Glen. I said, I've been trying to get in there. I've had a hard time because their calendar's so full. And with that being a property owned by ISC and NASCAR, it was a matter of minutes. And I had a great day at Watkins Glen. So that's been one of the big benefits of joining up with IMSA.
I think probably for me, after Sebring and Daytona, which were the big ticks in boxes, that Watkins Glen would be very high on my list. And I know in saying this, one of my colleagues on the show, Jim Roller, he actually went to Watkins Glen High School, would you believe? So I think that will definitely be one that he's going to be at.
Yes, I would imagine. It's so historical up there. I mean, there's still bars and restaurants you go into, and they have pictures from the Formula One days in the 60s and 70s. At the Seneca Lodge, on the back wall of the bar, there are the original laurel wreaths from when James Hunt, Jackie Stewart, when they won the races, they came to the bar afterwards and they hung the wreaths up in the back, and they are still hanging there to this day.
That's amazing. And Jim has said on the show before that his mother used to make the cakes for the winner, and that she made a Jim Clark Lotus 25 and a Graham Hill BRM. So, the place is obviously steeped in history.
Yeah, absolutely. The Argensingers family were the ones who really got Watkins Glen on the map for the Formula One race, and the late Pete Argensinger, who used to drive with HSR, used to tell me stories about being a kid and his dad having these lavish parties at the house, and he'd go in the kitchen and he'd be making Graham Hill a drink, or Jimmy Clark would be there, and he said it was just something else. So I think Watkins Glen is probably one of the most historic motorsport places in America, and not only for sports cars but for Formula One, for NASCAR. They've had IndyCar races, so they've done the whole gamut out there.
Yeah, I suppose you hit the nail on the head there, that it's the breadth of what they've done at Watkins Glen, isn't it? And so, when's that race running?
June 10th, 11th, the Le Mans 24-hour weekend. So unfortunately, I'll be missing out on the 100th anniversary of Le Mans, but I'll be happy to be at Watkins Glen instead.
Do you know, I think that sounds pretty good. A lot of people have said to me, bearing in mind my history at Le Mans, that you're looking forward to the anniversary. All the tickets are sold out. All the campsites are sold out. All the car parks are sold out. It's going to be like a zoo. So I'm not sorry to have made the decision not to go?
Yeah, I think I'd be staying away too. I mean, it's going to be a great event. It really is. I think sports car racing on a whole globally is really starting getting some momentum. And I think it's going to be fantastic. But no, I'll be quite happy to be sitting at Watkins Glen.
Yeah, I think there are certainly worse places to be. Maybe I'll come and join you. But it's one of those things. You were saying when we were talking earlier on that you're doing 12 different events this year.
Yeah, so we have our normal schedule, but this year obviously we've added the 2 NASCAR sport races. I go to Monterey twice, once for the Rolex reunion, Rensport. We're got our Ridge Runner Rally going again in May, where we'll be doing a nice kind of wine and cheese rally in the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee. And that's a really unique event because we stay at these beautiful old lodges, which only hold like 20 rooms, so it's very intimate, but it's just spectacular views, great roads, really nice people. And we do all our normal Sebring, Daytona, Road Atlanta. So it's going to be a busy year.
I think that's the understatement of the day, actually, I think, David. But obviously there's a lot going on. And talk to me about the strength of the historic racing world in the US.
Yeah, I think it's in really good shape. We've got some great events. We're certainly seeing a swing to more modern cars than the older cars. I think people are coming into the sport now that they want to buy a car which is maybe 10, 15, 20 years old. They don't want to buy something 50 or 60 years old. So we're definitely having to kind of change our groups around a little bit to cater towards those cars, which is good. I think it's a good thing. Spectators love to see the modern, the Audi R8s or Pescarola and then an Aston Martin DBR9. I mean, that really seems to get people going these days. It certainly does me.
But isn't it funny how you use the word modern there, and I certainly think of an Audi R8 as being a modern car, but if you're in your 30s or 40s, it's vintage, it's a historic car.
Yeah, get on for 20 years old, some of those cars now. So it's definitely where the momentum's going. To be honest, HSR was one of the first groups who offered these retired LMP cars somewhere to race, and we were doing it at Daytona and Sebring 10, 12 years ago, and now you see it all over Europe. There's several groups popped up now are opening up grids for these kind of cars. And I knew it would happen, and it's great to see now because with people in Europe racing them, they're starting to they want to come and do some of the bucket list events in the US. So we're starting to see some of those guys coming over and running with us. So and some of our guys are going to Europe to race. So I think it's all good.
So would you see your Watkins Glen event as being one of those bucket list events for European cars?
I think so. It'd be kind of hard for them to come over in the middle of their season to do that race, but. Watkins Glen is such a, it's kind of I'd call it a bit of a miniature Spa. It's not the length of Spa, but it's got the elevation and some challenging corners. Not as many as Spa, but I'd say it's a bit of a miniature Spa, but it's such a great track to drive. It really is.
Now, sitting here on your stand at Retromobile, that you've got not only the HSR logo up there, but also the Sebring Classic 12 Hours and the Classic 24 Hours at Daytona. Those are still very much your headline events.
Yes, yep, definitely. And Sebring seems to be growing in popularity, which is great to see. Entries were up again last December. We're still doing the aeroplanes, where we actually remove a wall between Sebring Airport and the racetrack, and we're able to taxi 10 vintage aircrafts down the back straight of Sebring, the wrong direction, and bring them into the paddock and actually park them in the paddock, which is, it's not done anywhere else, so it's a unique feature of that event. But no, Daytona and Sebring are doing great and still very, very popular.
You've always had almost, I don't know if it's a policy or not, but you've had that concept of almost run what you brung, that people can turn up and you will find them a place to race, won't you?
Yeah, and HSR has always been known for that since it started in 1992. We tend to go that extra effort to find a home for the cars, no matter what they are. I mean, we do turn some cars away, but on the majority of them, we find a slot for them. And that leads, what I've noticed is people come with something a little strange, and then they'll see what is kind of the norm in HSR, and they end up buying a car which fits in a little better. So, you've got to get them in the door first, show them what it's all about, and then you'll find that they'll either change their car, or they'll add cars to their stable.
One of the things that I've seen in working with you at Daytona and at Sebring is a lot of the cars that are racing tend to be much more genuine than cars that you might see in Europe. And I don't mean that in any pejorative sense about the cars in Europe, but a lot of the cars will be built to FIA HTP specs, so they are exactly as they would be. And there's the famous case of the six-wheel Tyrrell that's out there, which is 2 years old, and those sorts of things. Am I wrong in thinking that in the US they are more genuine cars?
Yeah, we don't really. I don't think we have a network of facilities who build out-and-out replicas. It just doesn't happen in America. So most of the stuff you see are cars that have been restored and raced. They're not build-up things. I don't think there's people who really have the expertise to do that. I know there's a couple of people who build Lolas from the ground up, but the majority of the stuff is, a lot of it's retired old race cars being brought back to life again.
Isn't it great though that you see these old race cars, and I can remember when those were just old race cars. That they were in the back of the workshop covered in a bit of cloth because they were never going to use them again, but they didn't want to throw them away, and suddenly they're worth $5 million.
Yeah, no, and I've spent a lot of time chasing some of those cars. I've been fortunate enough to find a couple of old E-types that raced at Daytona and Sebring back in the 60s, which one's over here at Goodin's stand this weekend for sale. But no, there's still a few more out there too. You just got to kind of ask questions and dig around, and it's surprising what's still out there.
Yeah, because in your other life running Heritage, you're very much a Jaguar specialist, aren't you? And that, I think, looking at that car on the Gooding stand, it's got lots of history. It's a lot of money, $1 million, but it's a lovely car.
No, it's fun. That was such a great story because I knew the car, I knew the history, and when I purchased it, the guy didn't have all the history, so I knew all the owners and I found them all. So when I picked the car up in the Midwest, I then drove the car in the trailer via all the previous owners to show them, and one of them said that he'd met the original owner, David Dooley, in the 80s. He'd brought the car in 78, I think, and Dooley had owned it in the 60s. And he said he went down and visited David Dooley in the 80s, and David Dooley gave him a whole file of when he raced the car. And this guy still had the file in his library. And, I was able to buy that history file from him and reunite it with the car, along with the original chassis plate. So it was like, it took a lot of work, but it was like putting all those pieces of the history back together on that car was like, it was so enjoyable.
And every time you and I talk, you've found another car, you've restored another car. What's in the workshop at the moment?
So the last one I found was probably the last E-Type ever to compete in an international race. It was a 62 Series 1 Roadster, and it raced in the 1975 12 Hours of Sebring. Unfortunately retired after just 30 laps, and then the car was put away, but the original owner still had the remains of it. He never sells anything. This guy's got so many cars. He's quite a character. And he was willing to sell it to me. I told him what I did and what I wanted to do with that car. So I sent it back to the UK. I had a E-Type specialist rebuild the body. I had a FIA cage put into it. So now I just painted it. So over the next couple of years, I'll slowly put it back together. But the car is the only E-Type, actually not the only, it was the first E-Type to race in IMSA. And when the guy retired this car, he then built a V12 that he got from Ron Beatty, Ford Engineering, and he raced that in 76. So this was the first Jaguar to ever race in IMSA, and obviously went on to Group 44 and TWR Castrol Jags after that. So it's kind of a unique piece of history. The history's a little bit later than most E-Types, but I think it's kind of cool that it's the last E-Type really to do an international race.
And just finishing on HSR for this year, I mean, as you touched on earlier on, that the HSR is now under the control of IMSA, and that you're still doing the thing that you do particularly well and running the show. It's going to be a very busy year. We've heard about that. Do you get a feel that the whole of the world of historic racing is going to grow and get better in the US?
I think we have a little bit of a problem where we have too many events right now. And I think that's going to affect everybody around the world if that continues. In the US, I don't think there's enough participants to fill the grids on all these events we have. So I think you're going to kind of see maybe a bit of a shrinking down on that. And we need to make it all work financially for everybody. But I think the sport's very healthy. I think there's a lot of interest. And like I said, with the more modern stuff coming in, I think that's going to help. But no, I think the future's very bright.
David Hinton, thank you very much indeed.
From Europe to the US, Australia to Asia, the Historic Racing News Radio Show.
Right, amongst the general hubbub of Retromobile here in Paris, I'm sitting down with Florent Moulin, who is the man behind Art and Revs. And I have to say, Florent, that amongst all of these fabulous cars at the show, your stand is absolutely amazing. But tell me, we've been through the pandemic, we've been through all the difficulties. Straightforward question, how's business?
Business is good, and especially with the Le Mans cars. Le Mans really there is a trend for Le Mans. With the success now of the new era that will come to Le Mans, I think we benefit from this high exposure, and on top of this good cycle in which Le Mans is entering, there is also the 100 years anniversary, the centennial, they call it the centennial, and I think it was important to this year to bring to Retromobile a few cars to celebrate Le Mans, and I decided to bring cars which reflect the last 3 decades, and they are all operating. We have restored all the cars, they are all running.
And you have restored them.
Yes, I have my own racing team called Iconic Racing, and Iconic is a little bit unusual in the way that we can handle cars from the 80s, 90s, like the Jaguar XJR 14, which is not the easiest car to operate, being basically a Formula One. Like Ross Brown said, this is a fat F1, he used to say. This was her nickname back in the day. Until the Audi R18 TDI, which is the most technology advanced non-hybrid car to ever race at Le Mans.
And it's interesting you say about the Jaguar that we sit here in front of, that when those were new, everybody said we'll never see them in historic racing because they're too complicated. But technology catches up, doesn't it?
Technology catches up, and 10 years later, the technology from 10 years ago is not a problem.
Yeah.
Look at the evolution of the computers, of the cell phone, whatever. When and now we are 30 years later. There are new technologies that help us to recreate the part. We can 3D scan the parts. We have all of the drawings also from TWR for the car, which is really good, and we can produce any part of the. We had to rebuild a lot of parts. We have built ourselves a complete suspension set for the car, which was not. It was cost effective, but possible. It was no big problem to recreate the parts. Now we have some technologies which, for example, for the casting. Mm-hmm. Now to cast parts, big parts, solid parts, is probably 5 times cheaper than 15 years ago.
Is that because of digital printing?
digital printed, and also the 3D scannings helps a lot. Also.
We do. We're sitting here within meters of an XJR14, which I find amazing in itself. But I mean, that car, and just talk us through the other cars that you've got on your stand here. Just talk us through the other cars.
The other cars, yeah. So we have a fantastic Toyota, a factory car that did 3 times Le Mans, 92, 94, and 92, 93, and 94, and with 3 arrivals, which back then in Group C, to start 3 times Le Mans and arrive 3 times was a big task. And the car was always in the top 6. And in '94, it led Le Mans 24 hours at night in front of the Dowers. And unfortunately, both Toyotas had gearbox or gearbox linkage problems and finished second and fourth, and this car did fourth in '94. We have an Audi R10, which only 2 are in private hands. It is, I call it the Titan, because it's a V12 5.5 liter diesel engine, twin turbo. We will never see again such an engine at Le Mans. And the craziest thing is that when you will expect the car to be vibrating, to be like a Caterpillar big truck, it is so sweet at the wheel. When you drive the car, it just doesn't vibrate. There is nothing. It looks like you are driving an electric car. It is an amazing sensation. And this car generates 1,500 Newton meter of torque. You will help me with the correspondence in pounds, but it's absolutely amazing. It's like when you take the gas, it's like being knocked.
That must be like a truck.
Not a truck. You really feel like driving a Le Mans sports car because it's light, it's responsive, it's fast. But when you take the gas, it's just like driving an electric car. You get 100% of the power when you take the gas. So the acceleration is absolutely amazing, and it is linear. Totally linear. You take the gas, you have 100% of the power. You don't need like a petrol engine to be at high RPMs to have the power and the torque. The torque is immediate. The torque response is immediate, and these turbos are continuously charging.
Yeah.
So that there is no lag. It's an amazing experience to drive a car like this. And then comes the R18.
Yeah.
It is a 2011 car. And this car is absolutely beautiful to drive. The R10 drives like a big car, to be honest. And the R18 does everything you want, never understeers. And it's absolutely amazing. I drove the car last week, and I never drove a sports car so easy to drive. If you compare the 14, the Jaguar XJR 14 and the R18, honestly, it's just like going on the ring, boxing Mike Tyson in '91, you know, and the R18 is just like being in the sofa, listening classical music, you know. It's predictable, easy to drive, effortless. The only physical stress you feel is with the G-force.
Yeah.
Because the G-force is absolutely amazing. You have to train your neck to drive cars like this, but the driving of the car is just something natural. The front wheels are connected to your hands, the rear wheels to your feet, and it's organic. It's absolutely amazing. It's an amazing experience.
And I suppose that was part of Audi's success at the time, was that it was easy to drive, easier to drive, and that therefore you kept your drivers fresh.
Exactly. And I had Benoît Tréluyer, the famous Audi driver, 3 times Le Mans winner, here for 2 days with me. He was a very gentle person. And in 2011, you have to remember that Audi lost 2 cars in the first hours of the race, which left 1 Audi with 4 Peugeots at the back. And they won. And they won because with a 13-second margin, which is smallest margin Le Mans ever, at Le Mans ever. And he explained me getting out of the S Porsche, where you have this very difficult curve where the car understeers and it's very tricky. Tréluyer got the Peugeot outside. And everyone remembers this. Then he could push, pass the Peugeot number one, take the lead, and they won by 13 seconds. And he told me this is all to the car's chassis and handling, that I could pass outside the S Porsche the Peugeot.
That corner, which I think since has become known as Corvette Bend, that's because we lost more than one Corvette there. That that is probably the most difficult corner on the track now, and interesting to hear you say that. I'm looking around at this huge tribute to the last 30 years of Le Mans. Benoit, but do you have a favourite?
A favorite? Maybe I have two favorites.
Okay, you're allowed to.
Maybe I have two favorites, one GT and one sports cars.
Yeah.
The sports car will definitely be the XGR14, because on top of being a super successful car that completely demolished the 91 World Sport Car Championship, beating, Nissan, Sauber and Peugeot, winning Le Mans with a Porsche engine. This car is an art piece. This is a sculpture, and now we stand in front of the car, and I could watch this car for hours.
Yeah.
I could watch this car and every single detail, mechanical detail, is beautiful. And it is, to me, it's one of the top 5 sports car ever. I'm talking since the invention of the sports car to nowadays.
Yeah, I agree.
I love the Audi for sure, but it's diesel.
The Audi is, in the best way, very German. That it actually does what it has to do.
Exactly.
And that it does it very, very well.
And the Jaguar adds emotion to it.
Yes.
And my company is called Art and Revs, because to me a car is first an emotion and secondly a mechanical feeling. And the Jag ticks all the boxes. And my second favorite, if I'm allowed, will be definitely the Viper. Because you have to remember what were these cars back in the day.
Yeah.
They just sent Porsche back home.
Yeah.
These cars had no concurrence from back in the day. They are the best of the two worlds, the best of the American world, where you can build a pretty simple car, not too sophisticated, but super efficient and super fast, and with, for sure, a lot of cubic inch where you get power and torque. And the magic of this car, that the engine makes the car so gentle, so easy to drive. And the second world, the best of the two worlds, is the European world with Oreca. So the car is rigid, the car brakes, the car has great aero, is good handling, reliability, and this is the best of the two worlds. And the reason why this car won everything everywhere is these people who share nothing, honestly, managed to work together, to work as one team around one project for an American brand to win Le Mans. And it is the first time Americans win Le Mans since Ford with Shelby.
Yeah, and if you think back to those very first Viper days when they ran the original cars, they were not competitive, and that it was Oreca who made a racing car out of it.
It was a learning curve. I mean, when you start from nothing, you have to learn. And they learned. The first 2 years, they learned. And after that, they won everything everywhere. Le Mans, Daytona, Sebring, the FIA GT Championship, ALMS Championship, National Championships. They won everything until 2005. From 97 to 2005, they won everything they did.
And you can't knock that. I'm still sitting here absolutely amazed by this collection of cars that you have on the stand. It's been superb. Florent, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. And I know you're going to have a very busy few days here at Retromobile.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk and share about my passion for Le Mans cars.
I'm on the stand here at Retromobile with Eliot, and he's from Osenat, who are the auctioneers, and there is a fabulous Alfa Romeo boat. Yes, you heard that right, an Alfa Romeo boat. And that, Eliot, you've got several of these to sell at your next auction.
Well, so we are organizing a auction on 28th of February, and we are selling a fantastic collection of 35 boats from one owner. He's a real boat enthusiast.
Yes.
And so right here we are presenting one of his boats. It's a 1959 racing boat. So motorized with a 1.3 liter Alfa Romeo engine. A fantastic engine that which the owner just suppressed the gearbox. We have here a fantastic exhaust system.
Yeah, and, you can see this on our Facebook page. You'll see pictures of this boat, but it does look absolutely fabulous, and I can imagine that must sound tremendous.
Well, we did not started it because of course we do have to restart the engine. Right. It's a little bit old, but I guess the sound is pretty fantastic, and the owner told us that the maximum speed of this boat is 128 kilometers, so you can barely imagine the sound during a race.
Well, we're going to be looking out for that auction, and we'll be reporting on that. But Eliot, thank you very much indeed. We've been on our feet for quite a while now, but thankfully we've found somewhere to sit down. And we're going to have a coffee and a croque monsieur. All of us on Historic Racing News have, to a greater or lesser extent, grown up in a motorsport environment. We know that Jim Roller went to the Watkins Glen High School. What an alma mater for that to be. Paul Jerd grew up very close to Thruxton. Peter Snowden, his parents were both race organisers and involved in race organisation. And I live very close to Alton Park in Cheshire. Joe Bradley, your nearest circuit was Croft, but it wasn't exactly on your doorstep, was it?
Well, it kind of was, Paul. I live in Sunderland, and on the south end of Sunderland, not that makes a difference, and Croft was 5 miles south of Darlington. So it was classed as a northeast track, not as evocative a name as Watkins Glen. However, as evocative to me as any circuit in the world, because it was the first place that I ever saw a race car. It was the first place I ever saw a race car of any sort. And if I'm sort of harking back the memory of Croft, I visited for the first time around about 1974, and I was about 13, 14. I was about 12, 13. And I'll never forget it. And I can still remember my dad, who had absolutely no interest or knowledge or anything to do with cars, let alone motorsport. So I don't know where the hell I've gotten this passion for motor racing and cars. I do not know. But he knew that I had this interest, and the main interest is obviously generated by Formula One and what you see on TV and stuff in late 60s, early 70s. Yeah. Distinctly remember watching the 1973 British Grand Prix, which was on a Saturday at Silverstone.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. They were, weren't they?
Yeah, it was on Saturday, and Grandstand, the sports show that went from about midday through till about 5 p.m, 6 p.m, to cover the football results, showed the beginning of the race. And it left the race and came back with about 20 minutes to go, if you can remember that as well. So you didn't get...
Yes, that's right. and there'd be some great battle for the lead, and then they'd go off and say, we're now going to the 2:30.
That's right, at Haydock. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Obviously, the 73 British Grand Prix was... the beginning of the 73 British Grand Prix was quite a unique event with the multiple pile-up. etc. That's not the reason why I became passionate about the sport, seeing a multiple pile-up. I was already quite interested. Anyways, we were on holiday at our family holiday caravan at Eggleston, which is slightly nearer to Darlington. It's in Middleton Teesdale, and my dad and an uncle and we all went off.
Middleton Teesdale sounds like a Shakespearean actor.
It when you're there, mate, it feels like a Shakespearean village. And it's still in the 1500s. Actually, it's a beautiful place. Don't get me wrong. It's a beautiful place. Some of the pubs are still in the 1500s. In fact, some of the pubs were built in the 1500s.
Yeah,
it's a fabulous place. Eggleston was the place we had our caravan. So it was a shorter drive for me, Dad, to take me to this place called Croft Autodrome. So off we went, and it was a very different track to the one we race on now. It's an old aerodrome circuit. It was used in World War II. There was it was the home of 419 Squadron, which were Canadian. It was very, very active during World War II. It housed things like Wellingtons, Lancasters, Whitley Stirlings, and Halifax bombers. They would leave Croft Aerodrome and head off on bombing raids during that conflict. And it's if you look at the sort of the downward view, if you look at the overhead view of Croft, it's got a very, very similar line. The old Croft, that is, a very, very similar line to Goodwood.
Okay.
It looks very similar. It's kind of like a triangle, utilising the runways with a little bit of variation, and then the runways, which are probably still under the track surface in various parts. And it ran round the outer perimeter of these runways and formed a racetrack back in the 60s. It became well known for Rallycross, which was televised on the other channel to Grandstand, World of Sport, on a Saturday afternoon. Remember that as well? You had a choice of sporting programmes, World of Sport or Grandstand. World of Sport being on ITV, Grandstand being on BBC. But anyway, getting back to 1974, I came under the tunnel into the infield, and it popped you out just on the outside of the exit of the chicane, which was very similar to the Goodwood chicane insofar it was you had to thread the car through two wooden brick walls, and they were made of blocks of railway sleeper. And I remember on occasion people would hit the railway sleepers and the walls would burst into many pieces, and then there'd be a delay while the race wouldn't stop, the race would continue. Then when the race stopped, the marshals would rebuild the wall. I don't know how many times I've sat there eating these sandwiches. So I remember popping up and running up onto the grass. You hear it before you see it, don't you? You hear a racetrack before you see it.
Yeah.
And, park the car, I'm out the car, I'm up onto the grass bank, and I've got a tails away shot of cars coming out of that chicane. And there were Formula Fords. And of course, Formula Fords back in 1974 would be very, very slippery and slidey, and there were, lots of oversteer, using all the curb, kicking up dust, and that sight and sound just hit me like a shot of narcotics. And I've never found a cure. I've never found a cure since.
You've been addicted ever since.
Absolutely, and I still am an addict. The crazy part of this story is I've got to indulge me here, Paul, and I'll tell you this and talk about how addicted I was. So my dad, in his wisdom, bless him, he thought that was it. He thought, oh well, I've ticked that box. He doesn't need to go there again. He's like, when are we going back to Croft, Dad? When are we going back to Croft, Dad? When are we going back to Croft, Dad? Yeah. When are we going back to Croft, Dad? Well, we've been there. Why do we need to do that again? I need to go that, and so you do a bit of research. No internet in those days, remember? So I don't know how on earth I did the research. Probably made a phone call. But I found out that this phenomena took place at least once a month, sometimes twice a month. And the thought of me sat at home in Sunderland or playing football at the park or swinging on the swings or, whatever, whilst this was happening was just unbearable. So at 12, 13 years old, I plotted a way of getting there. which meant first and foremost that I tell lies to my parents, and that I was going round to help a mate fix a bike or something at 7 a.m. So I'd get up, and I used to take, a pack of sandwiches, which I made up all myself, did them myself, and bottle of pop or something.
And how old are you?
12.
Right.
12. Got a bus into town, which is 3 miles. Massive transport interchange, bus interchange in the middle of Sunderland, which would have been a town centre then. Jumped on a bus to Darlington, which now from Sunderland to Darlington, if you drive it, is about 30, 40 minutes. It took the bus nearly 3 hours because it visited every single pit village in County Durham. So it would take about 3 hours. It would plop me off in Darlington town centre at about 11:30 a.m. to 12 o'clock. I would then get a bus to Northallerton, which would take me to Croft Village, where I would jump off. And I don't know if you've been to Croft. When you come into Croft Village and you go over the bridge, and the Croft Spa Hotel is right in front of you.
No,
Well, it would drop me at the opposite side of the river to the Croft Spa Hotel. Now, stupidly, if I'd gotten another bus to somewhere else, that one would have taken me much closer to the track, but there was no internet, so forgive me, listeners. So I would walk from the bridge at the Croft Spa the rest of the way. And as you're walking that, I don't know, it's possibly 1.5 miles, 2 miles, you can hear them. And remember, in the 70s, Paul, there was no silencing. Everything was on straight pipes.
Of course, yeah.
So the noise, which we'll come to in a moment regarding the history of the place, becomes a massive issue. I'm not surprised, because 2 miles away you could hear it like it was next to you. So in my sort of youthful exuberance, I would sort of run the last mile, because the sound would just be too overwhelming, and I would just have to be there as quickly as possible. So I did that all the way from, probably, for the next few years, between March and October. And by October, the nights were cutting in. So by the time I was walking back to get the bus at Croft Spa, it was dark. And to think I was like, 12, 13, 14, 15. I did that every month and saved up pocket money. Instead of buying the Beano, I probably kept it and used it for, and washed cars, or did odd jobs for reward. And I did that every month for a few years, and I got caught out. I was about 15 by now, and I got caught out because the bus back from Darlington was really late, and it got me into Sunderland town centre, and I'd missed the last bus home, so I had to ring home. So you can imagine the conversation. It's like, I'm in the, I'm in the town centre. What do you do at the town centre? It's 11 o'clock. Well, I've been to Croft. What do you mean you've been to Croft? Kind of thing. Well, I've been to Croft.
I can hear it. I can hear the conversation.
What do you mean you've been to Croft? Croft's near that. Yeah. Calm down, everybody. I've been doing it for the last 5 years. Kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes it much better.
Of course, yes. But it was how this kid fed his addiction. And Croft for me was a massive part of my life, because I continued to go there. I ended up sort of finding myself little odd jobs, washing race cars, fetching and carrying. They're called gophers, aren't they? Fill this bucket, wash that down, and just listening to the conversations. People like Andy Barton, Cameron Binney was a Scottish driver who was a champion. Keith Wickham, who I was very fond of, was Northern Formula 4 champion in 1979 and 80. And just listening to those conversations about understeer and oversteer and brake balance and bedding brakes and all of these terms that are so commonplace in my head now were kind of born at Croft. And then, through my teen years, I couldn't afford to go racing. I got a job as an apprentice mechanic, which was the first rung on the ladder to becoming Formula One world champion. Yeah. I had to learn about I had to learn about cars. I had to then, get enough money to buy a race car. But by the time I'd done that, Croft had been closed 3 years. As they closed it down, there's a little bit of controversy as to why it wasn't continued. There was people like, what's the name of the guy who had Mallory Park? That name is Chris Meek. Chris Meek stepped in. He wanted to take it over. The then owners didn't allow it, didn't want it to happen. Something to do with tickets on the gate and stuff, and tax and stuff. But I'll leave it there because I don't know enough about that controversy. But it was closed. It closed, and it was quite ironic that within the time that it closed, Bradley had enough money to go off and buy a transit van, a trailer, and a Formula Ford, and then I would traipse it down 3 hours, 4 hours, 5-hour drives all over the country when you pass where Croft Autodrome was, and then it reopened after Bradley had packed in car racing and had gone karting. It's like what and then it did run some rallycross in those years when it had been closed, and I remember it must have been about 1994. It was the FIA European Rallycross Championship, the Internations. Oh, sorry, no, it was even earlier than that. It was the FIA Internations Cup of Rallycross of 1987.
When it was really big, wasn't it?
Yes, it was massive, and you had the Group B rally cars, of course, in Rallycross then. And I was there with John Hindhoff and a couple of other mates. And if you would ask Hindhoff or I, what is the most exciting spectacle in motorsport you've ever seen? I'm telling you now, if you tweet him, ask him that question, he will invariably say the Internations Cup Rallycross event of 1987 when I was there with Joe Bradley. It was phenomenal. Belching flames, 1,000 brake horsepower RS200s, Lancia Delta Integrales. It was just ridiculous.
I used to go to the Rallycross Grand Prix at Brands Hatch.
Same period.
Same cars, and that they then used to turn sort of sharp right before they got to Pavic Hill Bend. Go down the hill on the grass, then up round Druids, and then down the top of South Bank. Which amazing stuff. They were. You have me hooked.
Yes, phenomenal. It then was brought back, and I think one of the characters that was behind bringing Croft back was our good mate Bob Berridge, and it was brought back with a bit of a variation on a theme regarding the track configuration, and then and that was about 1996, 97. It was then a new paddock complex, the control tower and the spectator areas were constructed, and the track was redesigned to the track that we have today. Back in those late 90s, and British touring cars came there, I think in 97, 98 maybe. British superbikes became a regular feature. In fact, British touring cars and British superbikes are still one of the biggest events and one of the permitted noisy days that the Croft circuit is allowed to have. And the noisy circuit thing has been a massive part of the evolution of Croft and the stifling of the evolution of Croft. I think it's that there was a residents' complaint to the Darlington Borough Council regarding noise of car racing engines, and there was a court case in April of 2008 where the claimants were awarded almost £150,000 in compensation for noise suffrage. And
they'd lived there for 6 months, I bet.
And probably because there was housing developments going on around sort of that area, no doubt. There was an appeal on that came to bear fruit in January of 2009, and the claimant's appeal was upheld. The injunction was granted. They didn't want the money. They just wanted Noisy Days limited. The Noisy Days have been limited to 40 days. Now, that's not 40 events, that's 40 days. So the British Touring Cars will be a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's 3. British Superbikes, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That is not bad, really.
But when you think that Thruxton is 12 days.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really? Wow. Yeah. I don't know whether that has changed since 2009. I do have I mean, we used to, when I was working for Robert Shaw Racing, we used to, it's the first place that we shook down Alan Taylor's Honda Integra when he bought it to go into British Touring Cars. It'd been our home track. We used it whenever we could because of those 40 days. Track days are included. Yeah. Circuit days, the race school is included in that 40 days. And we ended up having to drive to, Rockingham or Donington, even, drive past Croft, based in the northeast. Some interesting facts about Croft that I found. The Formula 3 lap record is held by Sergio Perez in the 2008 British Formula 3 round. The GT1 lap record is local lad Tim Sugden, I remember, watching Tony Sugden, Tim's dad, race a modified sports, which was basically a Formula 2 March that looked like a Skoda around Croft. Remember modified sports? Doug Niven's Beetle. I remember seeing at Croft, which was again a Formula 2 Chevron or a March or something.
And the DAF Oldsmobile that we were talking about the other day. They weren't really what they were. It was a silhouette formula. They looked like. Yes. I mean, Croft was the first place I ever saw a Formula 1 car. It wasn't a Formula 1 World Championship car. It was a Shadow DN1. It was bright yellow, and to see that sort of car at my local track, which was a bit like peddling you. It was a fast track, the old layout, and when I think back to those days of no runoffs, and just how fast it was, the railway straight, for instance, which is now, as you go through the gate at Croft, if you ever visit Croft now, you go through the main gate, you're actually on the old track, and you're on a part of the track that is coming through a corner that was called Spa Corner, and that would be a sweeping massively fast left-hander off a massively long straight. And that left-hander led into a 180-degree sweeping turn called Oxo, which brought you back onto where the track is now, where it comes out of the chicane just before the proper Croft chicane. And you're actually on the track. And then if you turn, as you come through the gate, you turn right. That part of the paddock, which you'll see at British Touring Car Rounds, which is the support paddock, that's the old railway straight. That's the old track. Phenomenal memories there. I'm just looking down the lap records. Group 7 lap record, a McLaren M8C, Chris Craft at the 1970 RAC Croft Interserie round. I mean, Interserie was the European version of Can-Am. It was.
Yeah. Trevor Taylor, Group 4, Lola T70 Mark III-B at the 1969 Wills Trophy. And then the Group 3 lap record, Brian Redman shares it with a chap called John Coundley in a Tejero Jaguar E-Type at the 1965 BARC Croft GT race.
I remember John Coundley, and that car is still racing.
That is the car that's still racing, yeah. Oh, look at this one. Group 5 sports cars, Peter Brown in a Ferrari 512M at the 1972 Croft Motoring News GT round.
Oh, happy days, Joe. Thank you very much indeed for that. Really appreciate that. It's and what we're going to try and do is try and find some old pictures from Croft, and we'll put those on the Facebook page so that we've got something to look back on, and maybe we can even find an old track layout as well, because that would be great. Yeah, I will try and look for that, Paul. It'll, quite
few nostalgia points there for me. Teary-eyed, rose-tinted glasses and the like.
The Historic Racing News Radio Show.
The Historic Racing News Facebook page has been pretty busy lately. Actually, that's been an understatement. For anyone who hasn't been there, we have a mixture of news and information. We talk about forthcoming events, results from the auction scene and cars that are coming to auction. And we look forward to all sorts of things that are happening there. But we also look back as well at old stories, old cars, old drivers, and all sorts of things that are going on. As I say, it's been busy, and that the Historic Racing News page has actually appeared on people's screens an amazing 4.4 million times in the last 28 days. Please have a look at the page if you haven't done already, because it's a good way for you to tell us your thoughts on the world of historic racing, and also to interact with other people on the pages as well. But please, if you're going to do that, just click that follow button, because that just helps with our numbers and helps us know that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good way for our listeners to, engage and interact and generate some conversation that might even end up as a podcast subject that, gives us something to talk about. And the one that popped out for me recently, Paul, is the post that went out about 4 days ago on the new Motorsport UK regulations for track limits. And of course, just to give you a précis of that, they're talking about any kind of connect to the white line that borders the track will result in a penalty. So whereas before it used to be where you could put 2 wheels over the white line, but not 4 wheels, they're now talking about any part of the tyre that goes over the curb edge or the white line will result in a penalty. And of course, this was never a problem back in the day of historic racing news, back in the world of historic racing news, I should say. For instance, Philip Parfitt has put a beautiful picture as a comment, and he said, at the Crystal Palace circuit, the track limit was the railway sleeper wall. and of course, he's put a beautiful picture on there of a Ford Anglia being followed by a Mini back in the heyday of the late 60s. And yeah, I mean, that is the case. And there's plenty of comments on there from people who race now, people who raced before. I'm just trying to find out the name of the chap. John Bennett says, why not return to the 1950s track limits? 45-gallon drums filled with sand at the corner apex. Yeah.
So true.
It absolutely is, and it reminds me of, remember a guy called Derek Ongaro?
Yes.
He was, back in 1991, I was part of an organisation group that created a karting event using the car park of the Metro Centre. And keep a long story short, we approached the Metro Centre. We said, look, we'd like to put a karting event on in your coach park, which is out the back, which nobody uses. And bizarrely, their marketing director went, yeah, okay. So it was like, oh, bloody hell, oh, shit.
Yeah.
Here we go. Anyways, so we went onto the car park and we mapped out this track for 100cc carts, top end 80 plus miles an hour, 0 to 60 in about 3.5 seconds. So, pretty fast carts. And Derek Ongaro came to inspect the venue. And
he was the chief,
because he was the MSA's safety man. He was at the time the man who pushed the start button at Formula One Grand Prix as well, everywhere in the world.
Right.
So we meet up with Derek Ongaro, me and my pal Gary Gaffney, who designed this track. And at one end of the coach park, we were going to use a 180-degree sweeping hairpin. But on the inside edge of this hairpin, so the apex of the hairpin has been formed by normal road curbing with fixed steel pedestrian barriers.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. On the inside, so you would go into this corner, and you would turn into the apex of the corner, which would be a curb with a steel barrier. steel pedestrian barrier. So we walk down to this end, and we're thinking, "Oh, I'm not sure he's going to allow us." It's the only way we can get the track to come back on itself, right? We've got to use this bit of track, this bit of road, I should say.
Yeah.
And so it was like, right, Mr. Ungaro, what do you think about this? Then are we going to, do you want straw bales put in front of the barriers? Do you want tyres? He went, "Oh no, just leave it like that. If you hit that, you're doing it wrong." That's what he said. It was like, oh, now I was going to compete at this, and I'm thinking to myself, that's going to be a bit daunting, actually. And I do remember in the race, it was a spectator area, and I do remember in the race, I'm turning into this hairpin, and as I'm sort of, trying to get as close to the curb as possible, I look up to me right, and there's people leaning over the barrier, literally as close as I can sort of high five them and these kids, poking their hand through the barrier and stuff. And he just left it. He just left it because you know what? That circuit limits. That's what we need.
Yeah, that's what track limits is. And I mean, we had another post on the Facebook page about sort of a different form of track limits, didn't we?
Oh, that was a brilliant picture. Yes, that was posted 2 days ago, and it's an absolutely exquisite trip down memory lane. It's of Brian Muir in the John Wyer Automotive, the Gulf Ford GT40, and it's gone off at Mulsanne in 1968, and literally the track limits are defined by a bank of sand.
Yeah, and not just flat sand, but a bank.
No, a bank of sand where you sort of veer into this bank of sand, and the car is literally buried in sand. And there's a picture of Brian using a shovel, which he would have carried on board for just this event, digging the car or attempting to dig the car out. Fabrizio Canizzi, he sends a picture of Teodoro Zeccoli digging his Alfa Romeo out of that same spot in 1965. And Morgan Joseph Cleesby sends a lovely picture of I can't tell what that is, in the sand. It looks like a Sprite or an Austin Healey. And of course, while you're digging your car out, this picture totally depicts this. While you're digging the car out of the sand, the race is going on.
Yes.
And drivers are maximising their exit by skirting your shovel as it's in your hand.
Yes,
and
it's
that
true.
picture from Morgan Joseph Cleesby absolutely shows that. David Glanfield makes a very good point here, and he says when track limits weren't even a talking point.
Yeah,
and they weren't, Paul. I remember first racing at Oulton Park in 1985, and Oulton Park, for me, I remember it as being a corridor of steel. There was no runoff. I think the biggest runoff you had was at the bottom of Cascades, but round the back where you came off the long straight through Knickerbrook, where there was zero runoff of the very, maybe a metre or two of grass and then steel, and then as you went up Clay Hill and on towards Druids, that the corridor narrowed, and it was just a corridor winding its way through the double apex Druids corner, and there was about a metre of grass on the left and a metre of grass on the right, both bounded by Armco rail. And you did get the feeling quite claustrophobic as you came over Clay Hill and you sort of thread your way through there. You did not want to get that wrong. And
the strange thing about that is that was viewed as being much safer than it had been before, which is when you threaded your way through the trees.
That it's an evolutionary process when you think about it,
isn't it? Yeah.
It really is, and yes, that was a better solution. The barrier was put there to stop you going into the trees. Cutting of trees down and extending that gap to, and then bringing in gravel traps and the like. I mean, the gravel trap is perhaps an evolution of that sandbank, which we see on our Facebook post there.
Isn't it funny though that with Spa, that Spa has gone through this whole change in the last 12, 18 months of they've done away with a lot of the high anti-skid stuff that they had on the traps, and replaced it with gravel for the bike racers. And that everybody started by saying, oh, that's dreadful, it's going to be safety cars everywhere. But actually, talking to people who've now driven it, everybody says the place is much better for the new gravel traps, because you don't take the risks that you used to do, and that it's just another part of the evolution, isn't it?
Well, I suppose, taking risks, motorsport's always going to be dangerous. I don't think we could ever sanitize it to the extent where it remained. It is ultimately 100% safe. The mere definition of driving very fast, going at speed, is dangerous. I mean, that's perhaps, Paul, why I'm a commentator and not a professional race driver, because driving my Formula Ford through Druids at Oulton Park certainly got my attention, and certainly got me to maybe feather off the throttle, whereas someone with bigger kahunas would have kept their foot in, kind of thing. Yeah. And that's where the great drivers became great, and the not so great drivers remained not so great, because I've used the term, haven't I, quite often, of is it a matter of just having no imagination? So,
that little mahogany box on the pit counter where they put their brains.
Yes. Or is it just a case of the ultimate confidence in their ability to control the machine and not have that accident? But then, the periods of racing, what we're talking about, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, into the 90s, even today, we are still talking about nuts and bolts holding these things together. We're still talking about metals, and we're talking about, carbon fiber and things that, can and sometimes do break, more so back in the day, back in those periods where we're talking about. So that's the bit of the imagination you kind of want to put away, of how is this thing put together? As a mechanic, as a race mechanic, when you see your car leave the pits, I defy any race mechanic to tell me they don't do this. You go through a checklist in your head of what you've just done on that car.
I suppose so. Yeah, I suppose so.
You're constantly going through a checklist in your head of what you're doing, of what you've done to that car, and it's intense. I mean, the sport's intense, isn't it? That's why we love it.
One of my favourite posts that we put up over the last few weeks was a tails away shot of a Martini Porsche 917 at the 1971 Spa 1000 Ks, and that we put on there. The car was destined to retire, and that race winners were Pedro Rodriguez and Jackie Oliver in a similar Porsche 917K entered by JWA Gulf at an average speed of over 150 miles an hour, which included the pit stop time. Just stop and think about that.
Yeah, I know.
And the fastest lap in the race was considerably faster than the pole position time for the Grand Prix that year, which also bears thinking about. But we had one of the responses to that was interesting, because I read it as it came in, and it said, actually, the race average was just under 150 miles an hour at 149.4. Pedro had the fastest single lap of just over 160, I think. That prominent white house was a couple of corners after Stavelot on the way down towards Blanchimont. So I thought, this is a man who knows his stuff. Then I saw who sent it, Brian Redman.
There you go.
So I thought, thanks to Brian for that. And we've also had a few others. And Jochen Mass quite often responds to the Historic Racing News Facebook page, and he made a very nice tribute to Jean-Pierre Jabouille a couple of weeks ago on the death of Jean-Pierre, which was very nice. And one of the other ones which I was pleased to have was we ran a feature on the arrival of the Ford Galaxy in the British Saloon Car Championship. And that changed everything. Jaguar had dominated the British Saloon Car Championship for years with various different teams and various different drivers, but it was nearly always a Jaguar in first place at the end of any of those races. And then suddenly Ford got involved and they got John Wilmot to bring in a Holman Moody 7-litre Ford Galaxy, which was, fiberglass bonnet and boot and bumpers and fastback body. It was a real homologation special, and they got Jack Sears to drive it, who always known as Gentleman Jack, but he was an absolute Norfolk gentleman. The sort of man who would wear a tweed jacket and cavalry twill trousers and things. And then he'd get into his Cobra or his Galaxy, and he'd become an absolute hooligan. And that he won a whole load of stuff and the championship, British Saloon Car Championship. And we put a feature up on the Historic Racing News page, and again, you get these responses which said, "What a lovely piece. My father would have very much enjoyed seeing this," from Suzanne Sears. And
lovely.
You think, yeah, that's nice. That meant a lot that we got that kind of thing. But we would certainly like to hear from everybody about that, and that we're going to keep this feature up. So it is your opportunity to be part of this and to be part of everything that it's about. So
have we got time to mention today's post, Paul? Which is
we can talk about anything you like, Joseph.
Right, if we've got time, it's just I've got to say today's post that's been up about a couple of hours, which is that picture of an unclothed Porsche 917, which shows the tube frame that the bodywork was placed over and bonded to. And when you consider, and you know what, let's just put that on the to-do list. We need to get Brian Redman on, because I have had conversations with Brian Redman in the past about the Porsche 917 and how scary a car it was. And the post that went up on historicracingnews.com's Facebook page a couple of hours ago just, I think, epitomizes, as Morgan Joseph Cleesby concurs with me. Morgan says, "'Twas said that a requisite of being a racing driver in that era was to have a poor imagination." Yeah, this thing this thing actually brings home that whole different breed. Paul Moffat says, "Chassis ? I can only see a collection of drinking straws." Think of the flex, and this went how fast? Yes, Paul. The thing is, right, and there's plenty of comments there about how the chassis was filled with, I think, nitrogen. Carl Hens says he hopes it was filled with nitrogen, not hydrogen, as hydrogen tends to be a bit explosive and would make the tubes brittle. It was filled with gas, and on a 917, there is a little pressure gauge on the chassis that's connected to the chassis tubes, and before you took the car out, the mechanic, or if you're one of the drivers, would check the pressure gauge, and if the pressure gauge was showing zero pressure, it would mean, and do you know the reason why they had this, Paul? Well, basically the gas-filled chassis, all of that tube frame was filled with gas, and do you know the reasons why?
Go on.
If the chassis lost pressure, it would mean it was cracked somewhere.
That's very clever.
Yes.
Very clever.
So they pressurized the chassis, not for anything other than it was a safety gauge to tell them whether or not the chassis. Now, where that chassis was cracked would be then a task to find out where the chassis was cracked. And I know we've talked to people who renovate these cars. Kevin Jeanette comes to mind. and Kevin talks about how, you know, the bodywork was bonded to this tube frame. So it's not, the picture shows an uncloaked 917. It wasn't an easy job to uncloak that car. And if you have a look at the picture, listeners, it was posted a couple of hours ago, or you'll find it somewhere on the feed by the time this show goes out, Paul.
Yeah.
Have a look at the driver and have a look at the engine that he's basically got strapped to his backside.
Yes, that's what I thought.
I mean,
that if you hit a wall with that, you've not only got to worry about the fact that your feet are in front of the front wheels, you've also got to worry about the fact that you've got a 12-cylinder engine, as you say, strapped to your shoulders, which is going to be trying to make its way through the front of the car. Yeah, it's...
Don't worry, though. There's plenty of triangulation in those tubes.
Now, at Retromobile, one of the main things is the Artcurial auction, and this is the star of the show. It's a Ferrari 250 LM, red with the white stripe, exactly the way that it should be. But this is an unusual car. It's the 10th Ferrari 250 LM produced. They only ever made 32, so it's fairly well down the production run. But nonetheless, 10th car, very, very limited history in terms of the actual car and its race pedigree. Now, it's quite interesting that what you get is normally people will say the pedigree is the thing. It's done Le Mans, it's done Sebring, it's done Daytona, it's done all those sorts of places. They're selling this, the selling points of this is that it's done virtually nothing, and that therefore it is the original body in every sense, the original gearbox, the original engine, and that's what they're looking to sell it for. It's going to go up for sale tomorrow here at Retromobile, and rarer than a 250 GTO. They made 39 GTOs, they made 36 of these. So this is going to be quite an interesting car to see, and we'll see what it does. But it's time for us to make our way to the station to catch the Eurostar back to London. Thank you to Simon Owen, Florent Moulin, William Ianson, David Hinton, Eliot, Artignan, and of course Joe Bradley. Next time we'll be on the show doing yet another outside broadcast from the UK this time, when we visit Race Retro. Now that's a very different event from this one. It's much more aimed at the club competitor, the club enthusiast. And for me, their much anticipated BRM feature will be worth the trip on its own. We've had a great time in Paris, and we'll certainly be back again next year. I hope that you've enjoyed this rather different Historic Racing News radio show. So, if you have been, thanks for listening.